to help the strike force meet its obligations. So welcome. Thank you for being here and continuing to contribute to this important work. We have another full program planned for you today, and we want to go ahead and jump right into it. But first, Brian Swartz is going to walk us through some procedural steps, but we'll do that after we hear a brief welcome from our co-chairs, Director Cozart, Anita Cozart, the Office of Planning, and Reverend Graylin Hagler.
Good morning, everyone. Excited for today's meeting and the sets of meetings that we have ahead of ourselves. As we've all acknowledged, we've got a big charge ahead of us. And I'm excited today to really start digging into that, and excited about what will roll out as far as the working groups go, because I really see a great opportunity for our working groups to be the place that we really cultivate a set of recommendations that we can send to the mayor that complement the goal that we want to set and also recommend to the mayor. And I was thinking about this, and the working groups feel like also an opportunity to like really dig deep on the key subjects. And if each of the working groups came out with one recommendation that they felt was surefire, one that we really think is going to move the needle as it relates to Black homeownership, and maybe one that we have expectations will move the needle, but might be a little bit of a stretch, and might stretch not just government, but also stretch private sector and nonprofit sector, that we could really rally around. That would be exciting, and that I think would signal both to the mayor and to the residents of the district that we're serious about the recommendations that we have. So that was something I was thinking about. I wanted to put that out there as a push for us, and interested to kind of hear feedback on that as we move through the day. But good morning and welcome back, everybody. Let's get to work.
Reverend Hagler.
And good morning, and it's good to hear from Sister Cozart, Director Cozart, and good morning to everybody. And I look forward to us moving forth the work. But sometimes, the work that you go forward with means you also have to look back, not just at the problems, but the kinds of hindrances that have been created in the system. And so in order to really begin to affect, because I've heard from so many people, and I know all of you have, of people whose children were raised in the district and they had to leave the district after they got grown. And that's a tragedy because people are wanting to remain in their neighborhoods, in their communities, in their homes. And so we really got to address that issue, because that is the loss. It doesn't make much sense to attract new people when you lose people that are already here. So let's do that work, and let's try to keep our eye in terms of the hindrances so that we can move forth in a way that's progressive, in a way that actually begins to solve the problem, rather than something that just sort of perfunctory go through regurgitating the issues. Thank you.
Thank you both. All right, Brian, over to you.
All right, can we go to the next slide? And then the next slide. Great, so these are our ground rules. I'll read through each one, and if anyone has any questions, please chime in. I know a few people weren't here last week. So we're going to respect the process. We're talking about building consensus. Everyone's here to do that and to further these recommendations that we'll develop. Please be present and engaged. So I know being online sometimes can be distracting, and all of you are busy people with a lot of responsibilities. So we really value your time and appreciate you being here and engaged with us. Please follow the facilitator's directions as we go through the day. Don will run the meeting as he has been. And we also want to start on time and end on time. So there's a packed agenda, and we'll aim to do that. We'll allow every voice to be heard. So for some of you who haven't spoken up as much in the past weeks, please feel free to today. We want to hear from everyone. And as Director Cozart said, we'll be getting into working groups soon and have even more opportunity for airtime. Please always be respectful to others and speak courteously. And then any verbal abuse or anything obscene obviously won't be tolerated. Any questions about the ground rules before I move on to the public process? Great. So next slide, process design. We've seen this, but let me reiterate it, especially for our public attendees. We will have 15 minutes set aside at the end of the meeting. So starting at 11:40 for public comment. Please hold your questions. Feel free to write them down for when we get to that period. For all our public attendees, we'll ask you to put your name in the chat. And then we are recording this session. So anyone is able through the Open Meetings Act to request access to the recording afterwards. You can just put that request in the chat or email it to josh@jsallc.com. Next slide. And then, as I mentioned before, and as we talked about, we are following a consensus-based decision-making model to come to these recommendations. And so we'll work through that in the working groups, and together we won't be doing any voting. Agendas will be posted on blackhome.dc.gov, and I encourage folks to go to that site regularly. We'll also post past meeting materials there. We did email the agenda out yesterday, but it's always posted by Tuesday on that site at a high level. It's always a draft agenda in case we need to make any final adjustments, but it is there as part of the Open Meetings Act. We'll provide all follow-up materials after every meeting. Please review those materials we sent out, like we sent out the binder again. We sent the link to the Upward Mobility site yesterday in advance of today, so you'd have a little extra time to review that. And then the summaries will be disseminated within 48 hours or 2 business days. So typically on Monday, we'll send along that draft summary requesting your feedback on it before the meeting. Any questions on those expectations? Great. Okay. So we are going to review by acclamation to see if anyone has any questions before we agree to the notes from the 23rd and July 7th. Those have both been emailed out. We didn't do the acclamation last week because a few of you hadn't seen the summary, but I passed that along. Does anyone have any questions about the June 23rd or the July 7th meeting summary before we agree on that? No questions? Okay, I definitely encourage people to keep reviewing those. We want to make sure we captured what you said correctly. So we will then, if there's no questions, accept those meeting summaries by acclamation. Thank you. And I will now pass it over to Anna Van Balen, our Director of Housing and Policy Programs at DEMPED.
Good morning, everyone. So we have designed the agenda today to be responsive to many of the questions that have been raised over the last couple of weeks. And so hopefully we will continue to lay the groundwork for the information that you need in order to move towards developing the recommendations that Director Cozart has alluded to this morning, but also we have been discussing since our kickoff. But they're here again for your review. There are 3 things that the mayor has asked us to do, which is the first is to create a goal for increasing the number of Black homeowners in DC by 2030. And the Urban Institute is going to do a presentation to help us conceptualize that this morning. Then each of the working groups, we want each of you to work on developing recommendations on how to address the problems in financing homeownership, increasing the supply of homes, and preserving homeownership. And lastly, we need a recommendation on how best to use the $10 million that have been set aside by the mayor and now approved by council in the Mayor Bowser's Fair Shop budget. So with that, I'm just going to give a couple of quick slides to give some context as to how we got here today. I stole this image from another jurisdiction who shows all the different types of housing that exist. And I think it's an important image for a variety of reasons, but starting with, when we say housing, I think we can conceptualize one type of housing, but in the district, this is all that we do. But I would say that everything left of private market rent is often been considered the charge of local government to address. And in many ways, that's what we do, and we do well here in the district. And then everything to the right of that has often been considered the role of the private market to address. And yet we're here because the private market isn't addressing some of the disparities that have been there, longstanding, and there is a role for government to play in this space. You go to the next slide. And so, as many of you know, but for those who don't know, the mayor's fair shop budget is packed with investments in housing affordability. At the very bottom left of the slide, you'll see the $26 million that has been set aside this year to help low-income first-time home buyers with down payment and closing cost assistance. And everything to the right is, we've discussed this before, is all the investments, the legacy investments that are made for homeowners that encompass a variety of different programs, but you'll see the Black Homeownership Fund there, but you'll also see money set aside to address fixing homes and also helping homeowners with weatherization, which we're not going to get to in the specific work. But I wanted you to see some of those investments because some of you have asked what some of those investments are. Go to the next slide. And then quickly, for those who don't know, as I mentioned, the great deal of work that this government has done over the years, particularly in the affordable market, rental market. This is just a quick slide to show you the work around housing equity that's been done. On the left side of the screen, you'll see where we know that most of the dedicated affordable units exist in this city. And since 2019, the mayor has been committed to creating equity and balancing out where affordable housing exists. And so these are the goals that we've been actively working on. And if you go to the next slide, part of the charge of my team is to track those affordable housing investments and where those units are. And so on the left side, you'll see, you may have heard of our 36,000 and 12,000 goal by 2025. And this is the progress we're making, specifically 36,000 units by 2025, of which 12,000 are affordable. And on the right side, going back to that map, is how we're tracking those investments by neighborhood. And we're the first jurisdiction in the country to do that. And so we've made some great progress and met our targets in one area, but we know that because we're tracking it in this way, we see that there's greater investments needed in certain neighborhoods to ensure that equality exists. Go to the next slide. And so with that, I see some questions. Brian, do you want me to take them? I see some comments in the slides. Go ahead. I
would like for us to always have an opportunity to get some feedback on this content as we move through the agenda. I saw one hand from Joanne, but let's start there.
Well, I actually had this, I unintentionally raised my hand, but I had the same question as in the chat on what is the definition of affordable for in the prior slide?
Mm-hmm. So most of our investments, so affordable is often anything at 80% of MFI and below. And so we have a number of tools, finance tools, and each of them have different eligibilities, but almost all of them, and that's consistent with HUD. HUD is 80% and below. And so that's where our investments are made. And there's great work that I can share at a later date on the very low income, but that's not the charge of this task force. But just so you know, we also track those very low affordability levels that are needed to ensure that everyone can be housed in the city.
Okay, Asante Mohammed, I saw your name.
Yes, and I had asked that previous question, but let me just follow up. I'll put that into the chat. You say 80% median family income is, I'm assuming what you're saying by MFI. Is that of is that of the DC area? Is that of the DC metro area? Can you give us a number of what is 80%? Because I've seen, there's usually dramatic differences between 80% of Washington, DC versus 80% of the DC Washington area. That can usually be a pretty big difference.
Yeah, so HUD defines that by jurisdiction, and they adjust that every year based on inflation and cost of living. And so we follow what HUD puts out every year, and all of our programs every year update their income limits based on that. So I would have to get back to you with the exact number of what 80% is, along with everything below that, but we can certainly get that.
Yeah, just because I think it will be helpful, because if it's somehow $80,000 and the median income in DC for Blacks is 50,000, 45,000, whatever it is, maybe lower, it'll be helpful to understand that even what might quote unquote be affordable might not be hitting the target we're focused on if we're focusing on Black homeownership. So thank you. I would love to get that information.
Yeah, and again, this initiative isn't necessarily focusing on just low income households. So we want to make that very clear, because we know the barriers are there regardless of income. But we know that sometimes special efforts are needed at the lower incomes. But it's a great question, and we'll certainly get back to you.
Reverend Hagler, Sheila Cross-Reed, and then Ann Ford, in that order.
Yeah, I just want to add in that the area mean income is set by HUD, and it includes places like Fairfax and Montgomery County and all. So it's a high figure. So even when you talk about 80%, it's still unaffordable and high. And I think that one of the things that has always been an issue of tension, and I don't know whether it's legally possible, but to somehow disengage from HUD's formula and look at DC per se, and particularly DC's Black community.
Sheila?
Oh, yes. On the slide that we just were presented with, I'm wondering, affordable housing production, but it's not broken down to home ownership. What percentage of it is home ownership?
So that's a great question. And that's in part why we're here today. Most of our efforts have been around affordable housing in the rental space. And so we have not been tracking our investments in the same way. And so that could be something that comes out of the strike force, is how to do that. Because as I mentioned last week, we have investments across multiple agencies. Like I mentioned, like the weatherization is at the Department of Energy and Environment, let alone like some of the investments in our typical housing agencies. And so we just haven't tracked it in that way. Whereas the mayor has a very specific goal on affordable housing, which is why we track it so closely, even by neighborhood as it's displayed here on the screen.
Okay, Ann Ford?
Okay, so when you mentioned 12,000 affordable housing, what was that reference to?
So in the 2019, the mayor came out with a housing equity report and specifically stated, prior to the housing equity report, came out with a goal saying that she wanted to, in order to meet the demand that was needed in this community, to build 36,000 new units across the city, rental specifically. And of those 12,000, we wanted to ensure were affordable. And so that's what you see on the screen is our progress towards that since 2019 by neighborhood, but also across the city.
Okay.
Joanne?
I had asked in the chat, so I'm sort of aware of the Housing Production Trust Fund and that it holds a lot of money. I don't know that much about it. Is that fund dedicated to producing rental housing, or that's only rental housing? There's nothing about that fund that can be tapped for potential homeowner units?
So good question. And I'm gonna, as we get later to showing the work plan that we have and the different topics for the coming weeks, and as we talk about supply, we're going to highlight the work that's done by the Department of Housing and Community Development, specifically to produce home ownership units. But HPTF is just one of the finance tools that exists. So it's, but certainly it's the one that gets the most attention in the district because it's the one that's locally funded. But we also match those investments with federal dollars, which Director Hubbard, who's here, can speak to in more detail once we get to that. But those are great questions.
Okay, I see Sheila Alexander Reed. Maybe that's going to be our last question because Anna does want to talk about the proposed work plan for the next few weeks.
Great, thanks for letting me ask my question. Can you go back to the slide that showed the locations where the affordable housing was and is? Right there. So Lower Anacostia waterfront near Southeast on one side has 3390, and on the other slide, on the right hand side, 850.
Mm-hmm.
So what happened there?
So the left is in the map shows how much affordable housing existed in 2018. On the right are the goals that we have for the city. And so you see the greatest number of affordable housing units are west of Rock Creek, because we know that's where the least amount of affordable housing is. And we have smaller goals for the rest of the city,
Gotcha.
because the intent is to try to balance out where affordable housing exists.
Okay, thank you.
Absolutely.
All right, so working groups.
I'm going to turn this over real quick to Brian to follow up from this slide.
Okay, everybody go on mute if you're not speaking. And Anna, I'm actually going to walk through that one.
Oh, wonderful. Okay.
So the next few slides really are about moving now into the phase of work where we begin as a strike force to continue the work, but in a way that is going to focus us in where Anita kind of started the meeting, and that is to really begin to generate product. And the idea, of course, is that smaller groups will allow us within the context of these subject areas, these content areas, to focus in on the charge that Anna reiterated at the beginning of her presentation. What we have here is the final, at least we recommend it to be the final allocation of membership to 3 working groups. And that is intended to both reflect the initial responses that we got and then the subsequent responses. And of course, this is not intended to lock anybody anywhere. We want you to contribute where you best contribute, and we want you to feel like you can participate in as many of these working groups as your schedule allows. So this is something that everybody will get, and you will be able to then be invited into the working group. So now let's go to the next slide. So we want to set a little bit of a guiding framework so that there is a way for the facilitator of each of the working groups and the note taker from the work of the working group to capture results from the meeting so that we will have apples, apples, and apples, rather than apples, bananas, and oranges come out of these working groups. Everybody knows that creates a little bit of chaos, and we want to move towards greater agreement so that by the time these working group recommendations arise to the level of the full strike force's consideration, we will be able to see similarities and internal agreement, internal cohesion. I just saw a question in the chat. Will there be overlap? Yes, I expect that there will be overlap. And one of the things that we want to be able to do is schedule so that there is an opportunity for the working groups to accomplish some tasks, but then come back to the strike force and be able to make sure that the strike force is making the recommendations as a whole rather than the working group. That's the critical consensus building component, and that's going to be where we end. That's the note we want to end on, the strike force's recommendations as a whole. So these 4 questions are to organize thinking. And again, we're providing them now so you can begin to do that mental organization so that by the time we start the working group meetings next week, we can actually be as efficacious and efficient as we can with the time. Next slide. Okay, so another couple of questions. We're not going to do this from the standpoint of every question has to be answered in order. What we want to do is engage your higher level thinking so that we arrive at some agreement about these recommendations. And I saw you come off mute.
Yeah, and we'll jump into this in a second, but we have listed these 6 initial questions really to start narrowing down some of the issues that we're working on. Because there's so much in this space, we want to make sure that we're moving quickly to the key issues, while also ensuring that we're capturing some of the thoughts at every level as discussed in the previous meetings, including how we can best communicate the work that we're doing here and what comes out of this, as long in addition to the existing work and some of the legal issues that might emerge. And so this will be the charge for the working groups for the very first meeting. And so we wanted to tee it up so you were aware of the questions.
Okay, next slide. So Anna, you're going to walk through the work plan, yeah?
Yes. And so we've spent some time thinking through the remaining topics that we want to make sure that can be captured in our full strike force meetings, while also making sure you can see how we're going to get towards finalizing these recommendations. And so today we're really trying to give an overview of the problem again. We're going to get into the goal setting as well as how we're going to do engagement. And then followed by next week, we're going to focus on how to increase the supply of homes. After that, on July 28th, we're going to focus on how the financing needed to get Black households into homeownership, followed by preserving Black homeownership and building wealth. And then we're going to focus the last 2 weeks in kind of making sure we wrap up all the recommendations around marketing, education, and engagement, as well as some of the legal considerations that are important to this work. But really, those last 2 weeks are also about ensuring that we can talk through the recommendations and the goal that as it stands at that point in order to finalize and have consensus on the recommendations that are going to make it into the final report. So on the right, you'll see the working groups. And so this week, we want you to jump in and start answering those questions that you saw about defining the problems and goals by working group topic. You're going to have at least one more meeting in which you can do that in order by July 28th to start preparing yourself towards the development of recommendations. And August 4th is really about starting to put pen to paper on what some of those recommendations should be, and then finalizing by August 11th in order to present and get that consensus we're hoping for in August 18th. So hopefully you'll see that we're trying to give you as much information as possible so you can make those recommendations, but hopefully you see the charge on the working group side and how we're going to be try to work as efficiently as possible in 6 weeks to get to those recommendations, which isn't a lot of time. We know that, but we think with this process as we define it, we can get there.
All right, let's have any questions, comments, discussion about the last couple of presentations, both the membership, the charge for the working groups, and as well as the kind of proposed schedule that Anna just ran through. And I'm sure that seeing it for the first time, you may not have a bunch of questions or comments to make at this time, but let's see if you do. All right, then what we're going to do is keep the chat open and available. We want you to be deliberate and considerate of the results we're trying to achieve here. This is where we kind of now double down and think about how we actually make some actionable recommendations and produce them in a timely way. Susanna, that's a great question. We will need to consider it as part of what the facilitators end up wanting to get out of each working group. I think the question that Suzanne Slater raised is relevant, and there are probably some others that are going to come into the chat. That's what we want, and we will do some work to sort that out. Someone else. We're actually a little bit ahead of schedule, so we have a few minutes to get a few more questions or comments.
If I may, Don.
Who was that?
That's Harrison.
Harrison, yes, please.
Anna, thank you so much for that information. Is there any other kind of collection of the ownership units that were created along those same timeframes? I believe like that list was just rental units. Is that correct?
Correct, because that's the dashboard that we have a public dashboard on tracking the mayor's affordable housing goals. And we don't have that in the same way for homeownership, because again, that's not been really the work that we've been charged to do, and what most governments don't really get into, as I mentioned earlier. But we have, I believe Director Hubbard will be sharing some of that information in his presentation next week.
Gotcha. Okay, because I think that as a baseline, especially as we look at how many more we want to help create and for goals, I think it's always helpful to be able to document and show what has been done with the funds that were outlaid in the past. So.
And to be clear, like, it's not just done with local dollars. Like, most of these projects are done in combination with private dollars. So, good question.
Sante.
Yes, and I'm not good at chat. I was trying to just skip to the next line. I already sent it in, but anyway. So yeah, I was just thinking that probably 3 metrics I think that could be helpful for all groups is, as I noted in the first one, getting a clear understanding of what is affordable for Blacks in DC and what is affordable for Blacks in the DC area, because that's also an option for bringing in African Americans from the area into DC to be homeowners, and maybe creating our own kind of Black affordability metric for, and again, be specific, DC and the DC area. Secondly, just kind of being clear about, and I know this is, I think, a area of one of the groups, what socioeconomic cultural characteristics, will be most helpful in making sure we're bringing in Black homeowners as we figure out what's affordability. How do we make sure that we're targeting, I don't know, whether it's by income, career, cultural institutions, what have you, to make sure we're bringing in Black buyers and it doesn't just because it will get eaten up. A lot of people want to live in DC. So how do you make sure we bring in Black homeowners? And I'm blanking on my third metric. So I'll just leave those 2 for now, but I just thought that could be helpful in all 3 categories.
Thank you. Just put it in the chat. Sheila Cross-Reed, then Ann Ford.
It's interesting to me that one of the issues that I deal with constantly as a broker is the aspect of the competitiveness for housing, and that their housing is very limited. As far as available housing is concerned. Nonetheless, typically when a house does become on the market that's affordable, then we have the aspect of investors, and investors come in and they'll say, I'll buy all cash as is and installment in 10 days. So that knocks out someone who has to get financing. So I think that there should be some attention paid to that problem within the marketplace.
Thank you. Ann.
I'm gonna piggyback on her because yesterday, you would not believe, I had 3 different people ask me about, one is a RN, I'm a nurse and I work with a lot of different people and also with clients. And one was from a teacher who lives in Southwest and thinking about moving to Maryland. That's no, hold up, wait a minute, we got something going on with the Black home ownership. So I think you really should take heed to the people here in DC that want to move, because of the unaffordability and really stick with that. I even had an RN that lives in Virginia and wants to move back to DC. And all of these are people with low income, moderate income, not real high. So make it really affordable for them to move back here. We got to find something to make them, make that criteria where they all can stay here in DC as we're looking. You understand what I'm saying? Please.
Yes, thank you. Very concrete. All right. I still see a hand up for Asante, Mohammed, and Sheila. I see your third point there, Asante Mohammed. You want to say something about that?
I don't, I'm sorry, I lowered my hand, just lowered it. I'm good.
Okay, so I'm gonna assume that we can move on to hear now from Yannicka. Thank you for that input. Please continue to submit it so we can make sure we're focused as we go into next week. Yannicka?
Yeah, hello, everybody. Diederik, that was the perfect segue actually into today's presentation. I am with the Housing Finance Policy Center at the Urban Institute and very grateful to be contributing to your great thinking today. And this is an excellent conversation. So what I am going to focus on today is really to start a discussion about potential short and medium and long-term goals for Black homeownership in the district and the rationale for each one. Anna just showed us the power of goals and having a dashboard. So the eventual outcome of this conversation is hopefully to sharpen the message on what should be the aspiration or vision that the strike force puts forth. So today I'm just going to set the stage for that conversation and provide some context and some benchmarks to help ground that conversation in light of the scope of the challenge and what is achievable. So moving to the next slide, we're just going to be walking through some illustrative data points to help guide that goal setting. So first, I thought it would be good to sort of start with what we're talking about in terms of numbers. And I'm providing this chart to really ask you to focus on a couple things. One is just orders of magnitude. There's about 45,000 current Black owning households in the district right now. And then also to look at the trends where we're seeing both a decline in the number of Black homeowners since 2010. And also as we project, the Urban Institute created some projections based on future population growth, household formation by race and by age cohort through 2040. And we project a continued decline in the number of Black homeowners and a continued decline in the Black home ownership rate in the district. So what to take away from this slide, I think, is to bear in mind where we are today and where we may be headed in the absence of any action and intervention that's meaningful. So if we can move to the next slide. So here we are going to, I think we can also move on to the next slide. Here's just some examples of goals focused on home ownership that have been developed in DC. We're including these not to really focus on this particular goal, although I will say it was achieved, but to just show you the kind of example of what we're asking you all to be doing. To have something that's easily communicated, that is aspirational and achievable and can help people get aligned around those goals. And we're not aiming to set the goal today. But we do want you to keep this objective at the top of mind to eventually settle on a number, as well as the other recommendations you're coming up with. So I wanted to stay, yeah, we're still there. So again, not to fixate on the goal, but if you do start focusing on it, you want to keep in mind that these are all owners, not broken out by race, and also that these goals were established in the 2006 plan. So they're over 15 years old now. But I wanted to point to that because there's a new plan coming in the future, a new 20-year plan that will be written soon. And if people can mute, that's great. So what the strike force comes up with could potentially inform that next 20-year plan. But again, a reminder that we are focusing per the mayor's guidance on a goal for 2030. So there's that example. And now we can move on to some of the potential benchmarks that might help you think. None of these are supposed to be goals. I'm just offering these ways of framing the potential kinds of things you can think about and to give you some numbers that you can start playing with. But one thing I want to define is the terminology for net new. You know, we have a certain number of Black homeowners today. In 2030, we're going to have a different number of Black homeowners. Between here and there, some people are going to come, some new Black homeowners are going to buy homes, get mortgages, buy a home in the district. And some people are going to sell their homes and no longer be Black homeowners here. Maybe they'll move away. Maybe they will age out of home ownership. Maybe they'll lose their homes through foreclosure. So you've got some gains and some losses between here and there, but we want to see a goal for all of that combined for 2030, all of that taken into account. And that's what we mean by net new. Okay, so I will walk through each of these kind of frames, going from the sort of the highest number to the lowest. The first one we called 3 by 30, and we picked that because there's a national project called the Black Homeownership Collaborative, and they set a goal of 3 million net new Black homeowners across the US by 2030. This is a pretty aspirational goal, but what we tried to do was say, you know, using pretty rough estimates, but if you tried to allocate this across different places, what would that mean for DC? And so the estimate we came up with there was, you know, to help to do DC's part of the 3 by 30, we'd be looking at close to 30,000 net new Black households. That is a huge addition on top of what we already have, right? Because we just saw those numbers. So that's a pretty audacious goal.
By 2030, you would need 18,000 more?
Yes, that's right. That's for the 3 by 30. And again, these are not goals. These are just ways to think about how these numbers come together and what you're saying when you pick a particular number. The second one is sort of, well, what if you just wanted to get the Black homeownership rate to be the same level as the white homeownership rate in the district? And so that would be the 18,000 roughly number. And if that was your 2030 goal, or you might have that as a longer term goal, but with some, you know, midpoint by 2030. Another thing to do is just to pick a number like 10%. You know, if you were looking around 10% net new Black homeowners by 2030, that would be roughly 12,000. Over the 2019 ACS number, whatever, we can get the details of that, which baseline you use. But the main point is, again, just to establish orders of magnitude here. And a fourth one here, just so you kind of understand that, because again, we talked about net new, it's also got to take into account the losses from Black homeownership, the decline. And so just to get back to where we were in 2010 would require 5,000 net new Black homeowner households in the district. So that's a lot of information right here on this page. And if somebody has a quick set of questions around that, I know we want to leave some time for discussion, but I want to make sure people are tracking all the numbers.
Yannicka, thank you very much. And we do want to take a few minutes.
I'm not done yet, Don. I have a couple more slides, but I wanted to make sure people grasp what we had here.
Let's go ahead and finish, and then I'll do the grasping.
Okie dokie. All right, so below the next, we have some sort of, you could call them sub goals or alternatives or just factors to keep in mind, right? Because they represent some particular challenges, but some of those challenges also mean that those are opportunities for areas for focus. So one thing to consider is, again, preventing and offsetting exits from Black homeownership in DC. And one factor that's particularly notable in DC is the share of the population that is over 65. It's particularly high in Washington, DC, Black households over 65. And that cohort has a higher home ownership rate than the overall Black population of Washington, DC. So if those households are aging out of home ownership, moving into different kind of arrangements, leaving the area, you know, that's going to be a tide that you want to stem somehow. And you want to be thinking about that. Legacy owners, I see that good comment. Also, it kind of, I'm going to skip around a little bit, but it kind of attaches a little bit to the fourth bullet, which is building wealth for Black homeowners and encouraging intergenerational transfers. There's sort of two things going on in that bullet point. One being just making sure that Black homeowners in DC, not only are they, you know, getting home ownership, but that home ownership is bringing the wealth building benefits and that they are able to participate in the prosperity and growth within the district that the district is experiencing, but then also in this intergenerational transfer of wealth from maybe some of those older households, and that is a potential opportunity for transferring home ownership as well between generations. And then I'm going to skip also, because we were just talking about older homeowners in the district, I also wanted to go to the third bullet point. Reverend Hagler and Ann Ford both pointed out how important it is, to focus on, the next slide, yes, to focus on young Black households in the district. And in this case, we're talking about ages 18 to 45. This is both to focus on the folks that are currently here, and also to think perhaps about the broader MSA, which has a high number actually of mortgage ready and near mortgage ready Black millennials in that outside of the greater DC area population. As of a 2016 report, we reported, or Freddie Mac reported, 164,000 mortgage ready Black millennials in the greater MSA. And so that is an opportunity. They could have been former DC residents who had to move out of the district, but it's also an opportunity to try to figure out how to bring them in and add to the numbers. Another thing to look at, the second bullet point, is one of the sub things you could focus on is the fact that Black mortgage, we're talking about people in the Black households in the district who have already gone to the step of applying for a mortgage. And so that seems to be a very, I want to say low hanging fruit. It's not that it's going to be easy, but they are denied at more than twice as much as the city, as households on average who apply. And so even just trying to minimize that denial rate could be a place to focus a sub goal on. And then jumping to the second to last bullet, there's a need to really keep in mind this challenge of supply, which both you have to recognize the constraints that the lack of affordable supply will put on your ability to achieve any of the goals, but also to think about what is needed as a goal in that work stream. Because obviously if we don't have the units for people to buy, or if those units are there, but they're going to investors or they're going to more affluent households, then that's going to be an obstacle. And then the last bullet is just to maybe you can take these goals and think about them not just as a 2030 goal, but you can also break them down into chronological sub pieces. And so I'll just kind of close out. There's a couple of additional slides in the appendix, or one additional slide in the appendix, which we can look to real quickly and then come back to. These are the overarching questions. What's achievable, given the resources.
Okay, please mute yourselves if you're not speaking. Thank you.
And I think everyone can read the questions themselves, and Don, you can facilitate the conversation from here.
Yannicka, thank you very much. All right, we have a discussion period here. Anita?
Thank you for this presentation. It's really helpful. Perhaps if you could go back to the previous slide, even before this one. So I'm wondering, we've talked about kind of the Strike Force identifying issues related to supply, financing, and preservation. And I'm wondering if there are strategies that we might think about for each of those categories. That how does that connect with some of the things that you're suggesting here, especially as it relates to the overall pool of Black households? Do you think about it in terms of age, as you kind of talked about Black millennials in the region, some of whom might be from DC, the family size? How can what's the connection between kind of the issues around supply, and strategies there, and financing and preservation?
I think that the question is somewhat for the whole consideration of the whole group, right? And I think that's what this conversation is helping to illustrate, is how there are multiple levers and how all these things will come to, all the work of each of the subgroups comes together in this overarching goal that you state. And maybe there is some discussion of how much of that net new number do we target to come from preservation and how much are we targeting from adding new, and then overlaying both how does supply put a ceiling on that, but also what do we need to do on supply to meet that? Is that helpful? I think it's a question for group discussion more than for me to answer.
Yeah, let me take another tack at it, because I guess I was looking from what you know about what works in this field. If you could say, I guess, a little bit about, just for context setting for our work groups to really think about, are there some things that we really should dig into from a supply issue, from a financing issue, from a preservation issue, that we know, we have some sense about has worked for Black households?
Again, at the risk of, being a witness who is leading, because I think, there are some pretty well tried and true things around down payment assistance. We've, on the new homeowners, there is a lot of focus these days on down payment assistance programs that might target first generation homeowners, which we could, evaluate whether that's going to be an effective targeting here in DC. And deeper down payment assistance, big dollar amounts in high cost areas. And we do hope to bring you maybe some examples and case studies of cities who are grappling with the affordability issue as part of the big problem that's feeding the gap. And also I think looking at these denial rates suggests that there's really some opportunity just around who qualifies for a mortgage and how. On the preservation side, I think in general, we've got to pay very close attention in any place, right, to foreclosures, particularly as the pandemic sort of subsides and the rates of home loss are falling back to normal levels across the board. And so people are kind of getting sanguine about where things stand. But what that often masks is that subgroups are still struggling. So if the overall default and foreclosure rate is really nice and low, that does not mean that Black households aren't losing their homes at a higher rate than is, and so people ignore the crisis within particular segments when they see the overall number. So I think that's an opportunity here to make sure that the homeowner assistance is going to the right places and that we are doing all we can to protect and prevent foreclosure. And as I've already alluded to, the data point about aging households would suggest a focus there for preservation. And then, supply. There's a lot. You guys have a lot of work to do there.
Someone else, some other question, comment. I think one of the things you're getting here, Yannicka, is the richness of your data. And I think it is going to need some chewing on and digestion. Once again, it is exactly, I think, the launch pad for the work that we're going to start in the working groups, and it's focusing. I want to continue to have people come into the chat with their comments, and let's see here. I'm gonna ask Ben Mendez and Tim White, who are going to be talking about a couple of other important perspectives, to bring their decks to maybe 10 minutes if they can, because I want, as you all are reflecting on Yannicka's presentation and the presentations that have taken place before now, I want to return and see if there are other comments and discussions that need to take place about this data, because this is really what shapes the problem, what shapes the path forwards, this data right here. And it's essential that we leave this meeting having an opportunity to begin to see that there are not a million things that can be done or should be done. There's some real specific ways that we can move forward. This is what Anita was talking about. I actually am gonna go now to Ben. Ben, I know I caught you off guard. Apologies, Tim. I'm catching you off guard, but that's called the audible. That's when you call a play at the line, and that's the play I'm calling. So, Ben Mendez.
Thanks, Don. I appreciate that. You can start the 10-minute clock now. I'm ready.
Okay, let's go.
Just really quickly, folks, I'm Ben Mendez. I'm from DEMPED, I'm the Director of Interagency Initiatives. I'm not going to take too much of your time, and I've been told that I can't. But I wanted to make sure you had some insight into what are some of the other goal-setting economic mobility work that's happening in the district that hopefully, and the way I see it, kind of gives an umbrella to some of this work and allows the Black homeownership work to have momentum even beyond the August and September date. But let me just quickly talk to you about what this program is. And I think it ties back to a lot of the conversations you have already had with residents and with your peers about what this work can achieve. So next slide. And we can go to the next one. Very quick overview. The last week of June, the district came out with something called the Upward Mobility Action Plan. This was a project that we worked with the Urban Institute. So thanks, Yannicka and team. And over the course of 18 months, we really tried to answer a couple of questions around how the district is connecting our programs to residents, how residents are finding and accessing those programs, and how we can be more intentional about evaluating those programs with some of the data that's been talked about already on this call. This is a cross-agency initiative. We put 16 agencies together thinking about housing, financial well-being, and workforce development programs together, not in silos. We talked about them on a spectrum together. If you want to show the next slide, just to give you a sense, these are the agencies that met month after month for about a year or so, thinking and inventorying programs that we had that moved residents from poverty up through to where their vision of prosperity was. We know that every resident, every family has a different outcome of what prosperity looks like. And in this conversation, I know homeownership is that end anchor for a lot of families. This is one of those places where we wanted to focus also. And we also wanted to make sure that we were having these discussions with the folks on this call. If you go into the next slide, we can give you a little bit of a sense of what we tried to do. This is a lot of things going on. I could see probably people leaning into this slide. You have this content, I think, that Brian shared with you. But what we wanted to do is we wanted to put ourselves in the position of a resident. And we talked to about 500 residents over the course of this year, a dozen or so community-based organizations. And the theme of this was no matter where that resident is coming to the district for assistance, there is a pathway where we can help them say, okay, hey, you might have to talk to 6 different agencies, but here's the order, the sequencing of where that might make sense for your family. Here's where to find that all information, and here's where your housing supports may link up with financial well-being supports, workforce education supports, and how all that ties up together. You'll see on the top of this slide that we kind of break this down to a spectrum. First, we talk about immediately stabilizing a household, immediately stabilizing a family. What kind of programs are like that? To me and to our cross-agency team, those are things like SNAP, like TANF, like emergency shelters. And then as you move from that state of stability, what are the programs that are actually moving you up the ladder? And I see Commissioner Woods on this call. There's a couple of other DC government folks here, but opportunity accounts. What are those kind of uplifting programs that can move you from that immediate stabilization phase towards your end goal? And in this pathway, you're seeing a very high level and very hypothetical journey, because we know that this journey could take 10 years. It could have fits and starts, but these are the district programs that we saw were maybe the major players and most effective in terms of moving folks from that stability to prosperity for someone who's experiencing homelessness with their goal of becoming a homeowner. Now, we've done a couple of these maps for a returning citizen who hopes to create their own business, for a single mother who just lost their job and is hoping to put their child through college. And all of these that we're hoping to get some feedback from the community on over the next month or so. But this was a way to put a more human-centered approach on the plethora of programs that we have and think a little bit more about the systems behind those that connect those programs and less about creating new programs and new programs and new programs. I'm going to move to the next slide really quick because I can see Don looking at me really intently here. In addition to these pathways that we laid out, we also kind of set these broader recommendations, much broader than the goals that you're talking about today, but I think reflect some of the conversations that you've already had with some folks. Those four are improving the resident experience through tools and systems. For example, you all saw the front door tool. Our Octo team at DC is actually creating a front door, but for everything, for your driver's license, for permits, for every kind of service you could imagine. That's really exciting to us. Aligning programs that help residents. There's a lot of programs that serve similar populations. There's a lot of programs with similar eligibility requirements. We want to make sure that those programs are speaking to each other on the back end and making sure your journey is one that makes sense and doesn't require 19 different case managers or agency phone calls. Measuring progress. I know Director Donald, Sante Mohammed, you guys mentioned some metrics and data. We are tracking those. We have some data that we think might be helpful to this group, but measuring progress to make sure our city's on the track towards upward mobility goals. In the same way that we've set ambitious 36,000 by 2025 goals, we are actively looking at what a district-wide economic mobility goal might look like as part of our next economic strategy. And we see this Black homeownership goal feeding into that. And the last thing I'll say is evaluation. We have done some really good evaluation work, but I think that there's a lot of room, and our partners think so too, for more intentional evaluation, especially around whether our programs are moving the needle on racial equity, which I think is big for this group, obviously. I know Dr. Hewitt's on this call as well, but trying to make sure that we are putting the resources and the intentionality into program evaluation. So I think one last slide before I get out of here. There's some places where, and even during the conversation, where our work in upward mobility, the district-wide, kind of connects back to the Strike Force work. But again, increasing awareness of what the programs can be helpful for increasing home ownership, supporting wealth building to better align some of those programs for residents, and then those recommendations around what to do with the $10 million, as well as creating the overall goal to drive the district for 2030. All of those align very well with the upward mobility. And while you're thinking about the goals that you're going to create and how the current programs and potentially new programs might interact with residents on their homeownership journeys, we encourage you to dig through the Mobility Action Plan. I'm always available. This was a joint effort between DEMPED and OP leading this. And you're already very familiar with Director Kozar. So we're available to talk through the synergies here. And the last thing I'll say is that the Mobility Action Plan, it isn't a final plan. It isn't something we put on the shelf and it's going to sit there, for a long time. It is a beta plan. We are currently soliciting feedback on that plan. In the next slide, there are some links to both the website and some of the data points that we mentioned. We encourage you to visit that website. We're happy to drop it in the chat today, but we're working with residents and community-based organizations to tell us if this plan is on the right track or not. So I think that was a hard 10. I'm going to stop there, Don.
Ben, thank you so much. Your discipline is rewarded. I'll get back to you with the reward. All right, Tim, let's go ahead and see if you can model what Ben just did.
Absolutely. Good to see everyone again. I start the timer on my watch. We go to the next slide. So engagement. One of the things I think we heard from folks, we were already working on it, but we knew we wanted to make sure we had something very specific to talk to you about. Folks want to understand how residents will be involved in this, as well as feedback from other stakeholders that the Strike Force has asked specifically about. And so we developed some goals around what this engagement strategy is going to look like. Number one is just to create an opportunity, an ongoing opportunity for residents to feel like they are sharing their thoughts on how to improve for future and current Black homeowners in the district, but also feel like it's being done in a transparent way to where the feedback that they are providing to the Strike Force folks understand that it is being received and it is being thought about in the consensus building that this group will be doing. And then the third goal being to ensure that the resident perspective is integrated into the final report. And so the themes of what people are saying to us, not only are they seeing it being talked about in these conversations, but in the final work product, they're able to see that, that's how those thoughts came to fruition. And so if you go to the next slide, we'll break down the framework on how we think this will go. Currently, there is a survey that is on blackhome.dc.gov right now that folks can fill out. We wanted to make sure that there is an always available opportunity for residents to be able to provide that feedback to the Strike Force members. Beginning next meeting on these Thursday calls, what we'll start doing is doing actual report outs. And so folks will be able to kind of hear, the Strike Force will be able to hear, but also folks, as you're filling out this survey online, you'll be able to see how it is being incorporated in these discussions and being provided to the Strike Force members. And then obviously Strike Force members, we want you all to take these into account as well and start to incorporate the thinking of the residents in there. And so just as quick for folks that do not know, it's a 5-question survey. It touches on the barriers to achieving homeownership, Black homeownership. It talks about the barriers to preserving Black homeownership, the financing challenges, the supply availability, as well as addressing the preservation issues. And some of the things that we're already starting to hear, down payment assistance, qualifying for a mortgage, taxes. So some of the things that we've already heard about, but we've also seen some things more in integrating savings programs within our rental programs. So creating that opportunity for folks that, as Anna talked about earlier, that are on the different spectrum of housing as they're trying to get to the home ownership, creating opportunities for them to be able to save. And I think we'll hear more as we work with DISB and their financial literacy stuff about what are the programs that are currently available, as well as potential ways to enhance that. And so we want to make sure everyone knows about this survey. We'll be doing more about pushing that survey out, and we want to make sure that the residents are really feeding into that. The other two that you see here, the focus groups, we heard from the Strike Force members about voices that may not necessarily be as represented. We've heard like the lenders and financial literacy voices. And so what we'll be doing is having some focus groups with key stakeholders. We'll be working with the Strike Force members to pull those groups together. And we'll be having those conversations. And then just as we were reporting out the survey information to the Strike Force members on Thursdays, we'll also do report outs of those focus groups and the information that are being provided from the folks with that level of expertise. And so we will follow up with more detail as to what those groups look like, but we've also heard, the appraiser community being a group that folks want to hear from as well. And so we will push to make sure that we get as many of those focus groups as we can by the end of this month. We have to move very quickly on this to make sure that you all have this information at your disposal to be able to make those final recommendations. And then the last thing being the town hall. We want to make sure that we have an event that allows for folks to get to us either in person or virtually, to where, folks may not be able to attend this one, but if we have a publicized event that folks have a couple weeks to prepare for, we can get feedback from residents at that event as well. And so be on the lookout for more details about all of these different mechanisms. But right now, again, as Brian has dropped into the link, there's a feedback form that folks can go to right now and begin putting in that information. And beginning next week, we'll be reporting that out. And I think I cut it in half the time. I can only spend 5 minutes on it.
All right, everybody, let's give both Ben and Tim a silent hand clap. All right, so now let's open up the floor. I want to go back all the way to the beginning, but especially I think it would be helpful, Yannicka, if we can, or Josh, if we can put Yannicka's presentation back up on the screen. I want to slow it down just a little bit. We don't have forever, but we need to just go through it a little bit more. And if Yannicka, if you're still around, is Yannicka still here? Yep.
I am.
Let's put that up, Josh. Let's put Yannicka's presentation up as quickly as you can. And let's just go back through it slowly, a little bit slowly. Let's go right up. Let's see, Yannicka, where should we start?
Well, if you don't mind, I'd like to start at the beginning, because I just noticed that in preparing this, I made a small typo. And if we go to the not the very first, but the one with the number, the first one with numbers. No, before that, there you go. Just everybody, I can think already knows this, but I just want to be clear that the number of Black households is switched from 2010 to 2020. So we started with 128,000 in 2020, dropped in 2010, and projected continue dropping. So I just want to make sure people didn't think that was some kind of a weird fluke. I think we all know this anyway. We've all lived it, but just wanted to be sure that that was made clear for the record.
Yannicka, point out some let's just focus us in on some more key data points that you think are highly relevant. And I want to just ask you to, while you're looking at that, I want to recognize the people who spoke in the chat. First, Reverend Hagler, and then I want to recognize Anita and Ellis. But Reverend Hagler first.
I'm not sure what you want to recognize me for, but
you talked about the focus on existing young Black households, existing already residing within the district as a potential priority.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I'm talking about, because I think that we have a tendency sometimes to look at, okay, those in the district, they can go, and let's build a program so that we can lure new Black homeowners into DC. Well, then that's a disservice. That's my argument. That's a disservice to the district and to those who are already living here.
Yes, I think a data point that is potentially useful is to think about the number of mortgage-ready Black millennial households currently residing in the district. And I don't think that we have that number at our disposal. Freddie Mac does it for the MSA as a whole. But even if you just start with the number of young millennial households in the district, I think renting today, I think it's about, I may be wrong about this, so I'm just talking off memory right now, something in the 27,000 range. And so that is a pool that we want to focus on, and we maybe want to look at that, break that down further by income potentially to sort of see who's really, we can come up with our own rough estimate on mortgage ready within the district, within that number. And that is, I would suggest potentially you could think of that as a priority pool. But then if you're going to get anywhere near, I think,
but let me jump in. That raises a question of what is the definition of mortgage ready?
Yes, so Freddie Mac does it by looking at the number of people who have a credit score above, I had in my notes, but a reasonably good credit score and no recent, no foreclosures, no serious defaults on loans, and who currently have a debt to income ratio of 25%, given their current income and their current debt load. So there's, some capacity there. Now, can they afford a home in the district? That's another question. And we can also, so I think we could do a proxy for what they're doing just for the Black renting households in the district and look at how many are within a narrower income band, not the very lowest income band. And then maybe think about how many of them have an income that could get them anywhere near buying a home in the district.
And the reason I'm raising that question because there's so many people in the district who see the impossibility of being able to live in the district. Mm-hmm. So in terms of talking about mortgage ready, they've already excluded themselves because of the marketplace. Yep. So we got to begin to look at mortgage ready with a different lens, and that's a part of increasing Black home ownership, and not to go back to the stuff we did pre-mortgage crisis, because the pre-mortgage crisis, we increased Black home ownership, and it was the biggest loss of wealth from the Black community in history during that meltdown.
Thank you, Rev. Anita.
So I appreciate this back and forth with Reverend Hagler about this, because it feels like out of this came this idea about mortgage ready Black district residents that are renting. And so that gets back to the kind of question I had related to kind of is the challenge, as Reverend Hagler was saying, the marketplace. How much of it is the marketplace, and how much of our solution should be part of more supply compared to, or not compared to, in addition to the financing piece? And I guess the question is, for Black homeowners, like, how do we get to figure out if for Black homeowners, is it some percent about supply? Is it what is that number? And is it some percent about financing? Because I think that'll be important and part of supply group. So I want us to make sure we're thinking about that And are there some nuances that we need to think about for that 27,000? And I don't want to hold you to that number, but it would be good to have what that number is. For that number, what should the response be from, you know, a supply recommendation versus a financing recommendation? I left out preservation, but if we should think about that group in terms of preservation, I would love to know that too.
LS followed by Karima, followed by Harrison.
Thank you. I put a comment or question in the chat about average household income, but I looked in the upward mobility report and saw it in there. I guess my question really is around like the why behind the trend. And my presumption is that average household income for Blacks in DC hasn't really changed, but obviously house appreciation and values have changed pretty dramatically. So it's putting a housing burden, increasing the housing burden on those who are renting. So they have less actually to put down and they're less of them are mortgage ready. And it's actually pricing others out of the market completely because their income can't keep up with the appreciation. Is that a good summary of what is displayed here?
I think it's a good summary of what's happening. I think that's why down payment assistance is so important because the rents are really ratcheting it up. As you say, it's eating into the ability to save and prepare for home ownership. So the mortgage ready number does not consider assets. It just is income and credit side of the house. And so what's missing for mortgage ready then may very well be the money for a down payment and closing costs. And if in fact the cost to acquire a home is so high that it's unaffordable for, let's just say you targeted a priority set of folks like, you know, current young residents of the district, you may want to think about a very deep subsidy to make that affordable.
Karima.
Yes, my question is for Yannicka. I'm trying to get a better sense of the numbers behind those Black homeowners that have left the district. The assumption is that they've primarily left because of affordability, but I'm wondering if there are any other socioeconomic reasons why many African Americans have left the district, particularly as it relates to schools, as it relates to crime and safety. Just want to get a sense of if you came across in your data, whether there are any other factors that we need to be thinking about and considering as it relates to not only attracting new homeowners, but retaining the existing Black homeowners here in the district. And some of this gets back to, I believe, the metric that Dietrich was referencing around what socioeconomic cultural characteristics would be ideal for Black homeowners.
That's a really profound, great question. And I think it's something that we probably would best know somewhat more qualitatively than through the numbers. I don't know that there's been any survey about why did you leave the district. I mean, of course, there's also some appeal, right? When you can see that you can sell your property for so much money and you're have reached a certain age to selling and leaving. And maybe there's a challenge there around not necessarily trying to prevent people from doing that, but to recapture that unit and somehow get it back into the affordable, into the stock of Black home ownership. But I welcome task force members to reflect more also on some of these other qualitative things like schools, crime, and retirement and all the ways these things factor in, and not just affordability. There's also the cost of maintaining the home, which is a little different than affordability, like property taxes and upkeep and that kind of thing, which can also be a factor that in certain cities for sure has led to loss of homeowners, just property tax foreclosures. And I don't know what the status is in DC. That may be somewhat better managed here, but areas like that can also lead to some loss and leakage.
Harrison, Christopher.
Yeah, I'll be brief. I think two things: the mortgage denial statistics that are shared a couple times, I think is something that both in the the financing and maybe even supply group we talk about, because there's a bigger conversation if people are at the point of full mortgage application where they get denied, because that over our swath of, let's approaching 1,000 people I've been able to help in my career, that is a very extremely small percentage, under 1%, that happens. So I don't know where that needs to go and be stated, but I think a tangible deliverable we can talk about is preparing folks to where they are. The mortgage denial percentages go down because they shouldn't be at a point of spending money, expending resources, applying if they're going to get rejected, right? Like a good pre-approval stops that. And then to the point, we talked a little bit about demographics and age, and this concern that Asante and I were kind of texting separately about this under 35 or a younger generation to try to incentivize or make space for it to own. It's been our experience that when people do get, or at least the subset of folks that we're helping buy that are younger, because I'm 35 and under, the earlier they get into ownership, the equity that they then are able to build over the course of even 3, 4, 5 years gives them more options, and the majority of them are still staying. There are some leaving. I just don't know how we can protect or create or try to focus on a product that is for people to stay. I do think there should be effort about the younger folks, creating space for them to be able to buy, and then a whole separate conversation on Reverend Hagler's point of protecting and preserving. I think that's a strictly preservation conversation for legacy families and older owners that are still here in the city. And I think we can tackle all of them, but I just did want to push back that I think making space for younger folks to own and better preparing them financially should only give good outcomes and shouldn't be something that we avoid or try to say, we'll give them money, give them equity, and they leave, right? I don't think that's a thing, and I don't know the data. Yannicka can definitely comment, but that has not been my experience from the DC clients that I've helped buy over the last 14 years.
Chris?
Yeah, 2 observations. One, in some of the data that we've seen, we're finding that first-time buyers are skewing Gen X, and that's primarily because of that student debt load, right? So you're not able to shake that devil off until you spend a few more years in the workforce, right? So that's creating somewhat of that delay. The second point I will make, and I really am, Yannicka, excited about this data that you laid out, is these boomers who are the primary homeowners, which makes a lot of sense. Historically, they've been here for a really long time. And so one of the things, Don, that we've been digging into is this idea of supply, right? And so as we dig into those numbers, how to work with those homeowners, right? We talked about this in our last meeting, as they're transitioning, what do they need? How can we capture these homes and set up some type of ecosystem, right? Which allows these younger, newer buyers to opt in. Right. And if we know what those demographics look like and what the opportunity is, and programmatically, as we kind of dig into solutions, might that be something that we want to peel the onion on?
And just to bring a little tactic that I've heard about lately, it is institutional investors targeting older homeowners, especially in Black neighborhoods, as potential that they could then buy and bring into the rental stock and have in their business model as long-term rentals. So I agree that there's potentially a really rich idea there.
All right, someone else. We still have some more time. I think this is an area where we should extract as much juice as we can. Yannicka, is there some more data points that you would like to highlight now?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's worth thinking about the without disagreeing that the importance of focusing on the current young Black households living within the district, the 136,000 or 164,000, excuse me, and I think that number may be even higher today than it was in 2016. Mortgage-ready Black millennials in the greater DMV area, in the greater MSA, and thinking about can they be brought? Some of them, as I mentioned earlier, I think, I have a hunch, were once district residents who moved out because of affordability issues. Can we bring them back? Can we attract them? And of course so I don't want to overlook them either. I do think it's a big number that really is potentially, I think if they heard that the district had a program and wanted them here, that could be a pretty powerful source of Black homeowners.
I don't often intervene, but I was in a meeting yesterday looking at the district's work for the 5-year economic development strategy, next 5 years. And this very question of how do you begin to reshape the messaging about the positivity of the district, promoting the district, coming back to the district, staying in the district. This is something that I think is a gimme almost. So just a point. Sheila and then Reverend Hagler. Sheila Cross-Reed.
Yeah, that's a good point that you just made, because I think that one of the selling points that I use is that people forget, as Native Washingtonians particularly, that the nation's capital is the most powerful city on earth. People coming in from all over the world trying to buy here. Often people living here don't have the same kind of a concept as to the value of living in the nation's capital. 1, 2, I think that it hasn't been enough emphasis placed on the importance of financial literacy and education, particularly, I think, starting on the elementary school level through high school, where kids start to begin to learn the various aspects they don't learn in the household, typically, that pertain to real estate and one day being able to purchase their own home, and understanding concepts like credit, interest, collateral, and equity. This is something that when people start to buy a house for the first time, they're intimidated because they don't understand all this terminology. I think that this type of thing should start way back so that people, before they even jump out here and start to buy a house, they have some knowledge that they are somewhat prepared for what they're getting themselves into.
Reverend Hagler and then Karima.
Yeah, I agree with Sister Reed, but I also want to say this, and this is an issue, because I think most of us who live in DC, we hear all the time that there's no interest in working class Black folks or poor Black folks. So the fear is, the impetus behind even this Black home ownership is to bring new, well-heeled Black folks into the district and discard the working class Black folks and who are already here, and the renters, as well as even the homeowners who are here in DC. That's the concern, that's the fear, that's the anxiety.
Thank you, Rev. Was there someone else? I thought I saw another hand.
I had my hand up, Don. I was just going to say to Sheila Reed, absolutely on our end, we agree 500%, and something that we're focused on here at the department, especially around financial literacy and making sure that more young people in the district know and understand more about finances, about finance management, and how to build and accumulate wealth as they get older.
If I definitely. This I just really quickly want to say that speaks to the first generation home buyer. If your parents are homeowners, you're much more likely to become a homeowner at an earlier age yourself. And I think that there's a lot about the money that homeowning parents can pass along that it makes that possible. But there is also an aspect of just familiarity, understanding, envisioning yourself as a homeowner, all that stuff, where housing counseling can play a really big role, I think, there.
So we got Ben Mendez for maybe 3 or 4 more minutes. I want to move from Yannicka to Ben and then Kim. Are there any questions around the upward mobility presentation that Ben made? Let's bring that slide back up if we can, but Ben is here for a little while longer. I saw a number of comments in the chat. Anita?
So I had a thought that relates to both Ben and Tim's presentation, that we want to do some outreach about this. And so, one of the things, Harrison talked about this in the chat, was the idea of, this upward mobility framing Black homeownership as part of it. And there should be more sharing of that. So that may be something that makes sense to share when we're having conversations with residents about this particular initiative, our strike force. And then the other thing that came to mind was this idea about how the education and I'll just use this word, it feels crude, but marketing of the supports that are available. what are ways that we could, through our engagement around Black Homeownership Strike Force, find out where the gaps exist and hear from residents about how they would be able to find out about the support that exists. What are different approaches that we might take to education? I would love to see us potentially using our engagement to do that and to dig into that a little bit more.
Thank you, Anita Harrison.
Again, Anita, thanks for bringing that up. I think to Reverend Hagler's previous comments around stabilization as one of the things we need to be talking about more as opposed to wealth building. I think this upward mobility project and building in conversations that there is a spectrum and journey towards homeownership, and that the funds we're earmarking in our efforts and thoughts are along this whole spectrum. To Reverend Hagler's point about stabilization, I think more of that is encompassed here in upward mobility, and like helping people get a stable housing unit that they're in so they can be working up these steps. I was really excited to see this, and I'm definitely going to be sharing it more and visually too. I think it really helps. So a lot of our communication efforts I think are need to be including this, and I was just really grateful for this presentation that they've been put together.
Sheila Cross-Reed, followed by Anna.
I'm sorry, my hand was up inadvertently. I wasn't having anything to say right this moment. I was in the chat, writing something in the chat. Sorry about that.
Anna?
I'm so glad to hear that people enjoy the presentation on upward mobility and sort of what it offers. And I would almost dare say that if I had a whiteboard behind me, that in many ways what we've been talking about is homeownership in the middle. So there's a pathway towards the middle, but that there's also a pathway after the homeownership that also needs to be discussed. And some of that is preservation, but some of that is also these conversations we've been having around intergenerational wealth and transfers of properties from one generation to the next. And so if I could put that image in your head of homeownership in the middle, I think is important in how we view this work moving forward.
Okay, any other questions or comments on this section? We still have a minute or two. I want to bring Tim up. Thank you so much, Ben, for sticking around if you did. But let's get Tim back and see if there are any more questions or comments around engagement. Let's just stop right there, Nina. Sheila, I think your hand's back up, yeah?
I'm sorry it's being done inadvertently. I must be pressing the button by mistake. Sorry.
Okay. All right. Okay. Tim, is there anything further you want to highlight? I know you had to run through it pretty fast, so get another bite.
The only thing I'll say is that, like Harrison mentioned a name in there. I have to go back to see which name that was, but I think names like that, please continue to send those. I think it's a perfect opportunity to pull those folks in, are in the expert focus groups. And so we want to make sure that if there are any folks that, are leaders in this space, there are folks that, for one reason or another, were unavailable to participate in the strike force. And we want to make sure we're pulling them in some of these focus groups, because time-wise, they may be able to do a focus group, but they weren't able to make this commitment that you all have so graciously done and dedicating this part of your summer. And so, any other names that you can always think of, please make sure you get those over to the team and we'll plug them in.
Any questions or comments from Tim? Tim, thank you. Any questions or comments for Tim?
So just want to make sure I understand Tim correctly. So if we have recommendations for folks to join any of the working groups, whether they're a part of the strike force or not, we can provide those names to you, Tim?
Send them to me. More so the focus. So if you go to the next slide, when we talked about the framework for what this engagement process will look like, we're doing smaller focus groups on topics. So the financial literacy folks that you all have, you engage with, obviously the banks that you help regulate, any of the folks that you all have, and sending those names over to us so we can involve them in the focus groups. And again, we will make sure that we distill the information from those focus group conversations and report those out at these strike force meetings as well as trying to have a more detailed format to be able to disseminate.
Okay.
Tasha?
Hi, I just wanted to mention that I think resident surveys really, good. There's a good opportunity there. At Manna, we have about 400 clients who, are at different stages of trying to become mortgage ready. And we conducted a survey and received feedback from about 75 of them, about what their challenges were in terms of, preparing for the home buying process. And we got some really interesting answers around, credit readiness, financial literacy, understanding all the programs available, available inventory. There was a really interesting sampling from, the 75 folks who responded to our survey. So I can share some of that data. It's just a small group, but I think that that's a great way to, really get feedback from the public that might inform sort of some of our recommendations that come out of the strike force. Even asking questions like, what type of home would you be looking for? Many times we assume that people want a 3-bedroom, a single family home, and maybe, they're, single moms with 1 kid or something that really is looking for a unit and can't find one. So those are some of the questions we answered. It may help inform the survey. And I think it's a great way to engage.
Thank you, Sasha. All right, we're coming up on.
Go
ahead, Tim.
Chime in, because Sasha just reminded me of something I had on my notes that I did want to say. You all, as members of the strike force, agencies, your private organizations, we want to make sure you all are helping support us with getting this current survey out to the folks that you all work with. And so we will definitely be calling on some of these agency directors and their comms teams more directly. But members of the strike force, please, we want to make sure that you all are pushing this survey out as well. We want to get a wide breadth of responses to that survey.
So in the 3 minutes that are left, I've seen Drew Hubbard begin to put some things in the chat. Drew, I know that Anna kind of referenced you earlier in the meeting. I see that you're putting some content in the chat. Any particular comments from you? We've heard from Chris Donald, who's always got something to say. But would you like to get on board, Drew?
Yeah, I'm just curious, and I just put in the chat just to see. We had some discussion last time about Front Door DC, and folks were saying, some folks were saying they weren't as familiar with it. And once that we were able to share it, was wondering if any of the other panelists who hadn't engaged in that website been able to look at it, and if there was any thoughts on it. And in particular, again, just reiterating that that's an attempt to centralize the existing programs we have in one place for resident youth. And has there been any general feedback or any questions about particular programs that could help the discussion in different working groups with existing programs? Because I think that's going to be a very interesting focus that I want to look at, is how do we really maximize, expand, scale what we have, as well as find new tools and ways to really attack this problem.
Sheila, is your hand up?
It is this time, yes. And piggybacking on what Drew just said, one of the things that I was talking to some colleagues the other day regarding the front door aspect of what the DC government provides. Remember now that there are tons and tons and tons of programs, and most people don't know where they are or have a difficult time trying to figure out where to go do this, that, or the other. I think that you may want to consider, in addition to Front Door, which is a website, which is savvy for people who are who's good for people who are website savvy, some people are not, to have an agency or something where you have like a clearinghouse where people can go there and be able to talk to people, have a human touch, and so that things can be explained to them. Because I'm telling you, people who are buying a house for the first time, they're intimidated, and then they go there's all these different programs, the programs have all kinds of acronyms and terms that people don't really grasp readily. I think that there should be a more personalized type of approach as well, so that people who need to have hand holding or what have you, they can go there and be made to better understand what they're doing and what they can do. And I think that we could probably serve people a lot better, or a lot more, if we do that. Because again, even with myself, 30 years in the business, and having all the various programs and all the various places to go can be overwhelming. So therefore, I know that the common layperson is having a difficult time being able. It's great to have all these programs, but what is the sense of having them if people are not readily able to assess them?
That's part of my point too, and I appreciate that, having different avenues to get this information out. And I think I mentioned last time, we do have a network of community-based organizations that we fund to really do a lot of the initial intake into our programs. We have our Housing Resource Center right here in the ground floor of our building here at 1800 MLK Avenue Southeast. We're also co-located with one of our CBOs. Again, to the same point, if our network that's in place needs to be expanded, they need more people, they need more offerings. That's the kind of thing I want to try to get to also. And again, whether it's reaching residents through the virtual way or the bricks and mortar that we do have in place, and expanding on all of those, I think is a direction I want to explore also.
Okay, we are now at the point where we are going to open our public gallery. I'm not going to ask Brian to review the process. The process is that if you have been a member of the audience, not a Strike Force member, you have been listening quietly and patiently, we want to hear from you. The question and answer feature of the chat is available for you to put in a question, and we will document it. We're going to do this for 15 minutes. So I want to know from my staff, do we have anyone who is ready to participate? Brian, I see you waving that off.
No, no one's raised their hand yet.
Okay, so what I'm going to do is, as soon as someone moves forward, Brian, let me know, but I'm going to call on whose hands did I see? I saw Joanne's hand, and I saw the council member's hand. So Joanne?
I was gonna say the council member was definitely first. I'll let her, if that's all right with you,
Council
Bonds.
Member Bonds, please. Council Member Bonds.
Oh, yes. Good morning, everyone. I just had some thoughts about the goals that Tim White had on the slide, and wondered if, as we are thinking about resident surveys, if it would be helpful that we think about the different organized groups and ask them to take the survey. ANCs obviously comes to mind, and I think that's something that can happen relatively easy, but it probably will not happen until September when they have their meetings. But we could prep them and have them ready to ask these kinds of questions. There are also, civic associations, tenant groups. I think it would be a great reward for us to hear from the people on the ground. It's great for the experts and those of us who have to wrestle with these issues every day to comment. But I think we need a more organized system for getting comment from the public. So that's just a thought, and wondered if they've been given any consideration to that.
Thank you very much, Council Member. Joanne.
I just wanted to kind of comment for the group's consideration. Sasha's report on the survey made me think about the role of condominiums. I think, I at least when I think homeownership, picture that row home, that single family home. Condos are certainly, often a stepping stone ladder. I feel like in the good view, it's a way to get into the homeownership market, build equity, and perhaps move into that single family home as life circumstances change. When it doesn't work well, it can be, folks fall behind in the fees, the association can't make repairs, and your value is not increasing, you're not gaining that equity, and it can kind of become a little bit of a millstone. So sort of thinking about what the role of condos, which is, certainly we could increase the supply of producing 30 units of condominiums versus 30 single family home opportunities is pretty different, and how we make that successful, and including for existing condominium associations, how you can have those supports so that folks who own condos are sharing in the increase in value in the district.
Reverend Hagler?
I was just raising the question of any indication of how many public viewers that are not attached to the city government, to the district government, that are tuning in, because I think we may have a problem in terms of really being able to create the kind of public discussion that we need to create.
Yeah, I don't know that we can distinguish non-governmental from governmental folks who are not Strike Force members. I think this is also, however, a good reason why Tim's presentation on further community and stakeholder engagement was brought forward today. But I don't know that we have, Brian, do we have a way to distinguish folks in that group of 15 who are in the audience?
Not official. I mean, from the names I see, it's about half and half, though, Reverend. So yeah, to your point.
All right, someone else. We still have some time.
Thank you.
I'll say this, putting on my other hat as a civic association president. I know I got an email yesterday from one of the Ward 5 Mokers advertising this. So we're trying to push this out to the public, at least to the ANCs, community listservs, things like that. But I think going along with what you said, really following Tim's plan to do more of the outreach is going to be very important too.
Yep.
And can I, to that point, just quickly ask the JSA team, is the Zoom link for each week the same that we could promote?
It is. It's a evergreen link for each week. And when folks register, as the attendees know, you can click which weeks you want to register. So you could register for all of them.
Great.
Like,
That's helpful. Don, I also don't want to forget, if there's time, can we just quickly talk about what Strike Force members should expect regarding next steps with working groups? I know a doodle poll was sent out and so forth, but if we could just quickly go over that, I think that'd be really helpful moving forward.
Okie dokie. Brian, you have something to show us?
It's not something to bring up, but I do want to flag, everyone should have received in the last few days a link to a doodle poll. If anyone hasn't used a doodle poll before, it's a way to identify times that you're available, and our staff is available to help if anyone needs assistance going through that over the next 3 weeks. So depending on which working group you're assigned to, you received a poll about that. If you haven't filled out the poll, we will call you probably today to check to see your availability by the end of the day if you haven't already gotten a call. So we'll facilitate that process, and that's to see your availability over the next 3 weeks for those working groups.
So I'm going to call another audible. There is a way that we have, at least I have, looked at going forwards. We have right now a Thursday meeting regularly scheduled every week until we get to August the 18th. That's segregated, dedicated to the Strike Force as a whole, as a committee of the whole meeting. We have an alternative that says we add, in addition to keeping that Thursday meeting, a working group meeting, 3 working group meetings, in fact, but for people, depending on how many working groups they're on, they would have an additional effort every week for probably 2 weeks minimum, maybe 3. The alternative to that is to reduce or to reallocate, repurpose one of those Thursdays and have the working group meetings all happen during that same period. Now, I'm putting that out there, and I know Anna wasn't expecting this audible, but it's necessary to kind of leave this meeting with some idea of how we're going to start to invite you as soon as this meeting is over. So give me a show of hands and give everybody a show of hands. We can repurpose some of the Thursday meetings, or we can add to the Thursday meetings, and you would have additional time. Who wants to just add additional time? Okay, who wants to repurpose? Who wants to repurpose the Thursday meeting? All right, here's what I want you to do, because this really isn't working that effectively. Send in something in the chat. Put something in the chat that says either repurpose Thursday, add working group meeting. One of those two.
So Don, I just want to raise the issue, this is Catherine, that some of us are on more than one working group, so that this doesn't allow for that to be addressed. And for some of us, Thursdays are not the best day anyway. So I didn't vote for any of those because I'm hoping they'll meet at different days, frankly. But anyway.
Yeah, no, and Catherine, thank you for bringing that up. But I got to say, this was never going to be that convenient. It's the wrong time of the year for this kind of work.
And Don, I'll chime in as well, because I want to make sure folks know, like, some of the information requests that you all have and being able to present that for you all on Thursdays, we're going to run into, if we go this route, that will probably mean that this meeting will need to be a bit longer. So it won't be as simple as repurposing. It'll be repurposing and expanding. And so if you're voting to repurpose, know that you are also voting to expand it as well.
Thank you, Tim. All right, so we're going to figure that out and get back to you with apologies that it isn't going to, be the best scenario in either case in terms of what we're doing in the month of July and the month of August. But hey, that's public service. What can I tell you? Harrison, I see your hand up, but I don't know if it's related to something you want to comment on, or was it okay?
No, I was voting from before. Sorry, before I put the chat.
All right. There's a couple of other things that we need to do as we start to wind down. There's an evaluation form that we're introducing in this meeting. Evaluation is something that JSA personally believes in as part of the methodology, but we also want to be able to use your time respectfully and wisely. You've been getting a lot of content. Is there content you feel you haven't gotten? Do you have comments about the content? The time. One of the things that our process is always trying to do is give you content, but then also give you a chance to be heard, to speak with each other. So we're trying to strike that balance, not always doing it perfectly. The evaluation link, I think, Evelyn, you're putting that in the chat. If you've not already done it, please fill out the evaluation. We take it seriously, and we're going to be doing this after every meeting. So don't think it's a one-shot deal. We want to make sure that we get your feedback and continue to improve, continuous improvement. All right. I don't see any hands up. Anna, Tim, any comments finally from the two of you before I go to our co-chairs?
Yes, thank you everyone for your feedback. I know that there's been a lot of information thrown out at you. We look forward to very quickly, hopefully in the next 2 days, to get back to you on what to expect on working groups, because I know that's where the real work is going to begin in narrowing down the scope and getting to some decisions around the goals that we're trying to set in some of those solutions. And so, so we're eager to get back to you and hope to do that, but thank you for your participation. And also, we may be reaching out to a couple of you to also join some of the larger full strike meetings. So keep as far as a presenter and so forth. And so we'll keep you posted on that as well.
Tim?
I'll just say thank you all again, especially as these working groups pick up and we start demanding a little bit more of your time. We really do appreciate your dedication to this. We look forward to continuing these conversations.
Okay, Reverend Hagler, Anita. Rev, you there?
All right, I'm here. I'm here. Thank you again for a good productive meeting, great discussion, and a lot of work to do in terms of trying to get some clarity around that. One thing, that is, I think, important for all of us, because I think there's some great comments that are being made. So hopefully in the summaries that come out, a lot of the comments that people have made in terms of really suggestions will be highlighted and come through, that we can sort of get those in one place. But I want to thank everybody for really just bringing their talents and skills to this. And thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Anita?
And I echo the Reverend's appreciation for bringing your talents and skills. It's been great to hear folks chime in and share their observations and how that may translate into the work that we do. I feel like today was really great, because I felt like the puzzle pieces are starting to come together about how we will work together, about the data that's we can use to figure out what our recommendations are going to look like, what our goal can potentially look like. And I think that, plus the foundation of us spending a couple weeks together, identifying the challenge, the nature of the challenge, and then getting to know each other, is a great kind of springboard for us to get to work really in these working groups. And just appreciation for what has been so far and what's ahead. And definitely to our presenters who had to rush through their really important content. Really appreciate you taking time with us and giving us some excellent food for thought. And thank you, JSA, as well.
All right. Thank you all. And we want you to fill out this evaluation form, so don't jump off until you do it. We want to thank you. And now you're going to be given, an opportunity to go a little deeper starting next week. So you've been receiving content, and there is content we want you to review, especially the content that you got today. Part of what we'll be also doing is doing more analysis and extracting from all of the meetings we've had thus far some guideposts, something that allows us to start the conversations in the working groups and begin to focus our attention, I think, as Anita and Reverend Hagler have said, on these actionable recommendations, not a million of them, but the 2, 3, 4, 5, a doable number that we can get done on time, that can be put to work starting on October the 1st in the new fiscal year. That's how we want to approach it. Got to do your homework so that you come to the game ready to play. Everybody all right with that? Okay, very good. Thank you all. We're adjourned. Have a great weekend.